Welcome to Event Experience by Bizzabo, the podcast where we bring the best and brightest event experience leaders together to share stories, tips, and lessons learned from creating some of the world's biggest events. I'm Rachel Moore, your podcast host. In this episode, we tap into the power of the spoken word with Cliff Kennedy, a communications success coach and public speaking consultant with Kennedy Communications. In an industry so influenced by who is handed a microphone, the importance of effective public speaking is paramount to success. Cliff shares insights about how speakers should inspire audiences, the priority we should place on speaker preparation and rehearsal, and how non-native English speakers and technical experts can be more included and successful in event content. So let's get super meta and speak some words about how the spoken word impacts your event experience. We are back with another episode of the Event Experience podcast, and I love talking about how much experience we bring to you listeners to really help you level up your game and on every aspect of events. For the past 31 years, our guest today has been helping in an aspect of events and experiences that impacts every audience member very directly, and that is the spoken word. His mission as a communication success coach and public speaking consultant is to develop today's speakers so they can use ideas to inspire and words to clarify and motivate. Who doesn't want that, right? I'm very pleased to introduce Cliff Kennedy to the podcast. Cliff, thank you for joining us across microphones today.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be here, to have an opportunity to talk with you and, more importantly, all your event experience listeners.
Oh, thank you so much, too. And I teased it up. Speakers are part of our everyday life in this industry, right? They're all over the place and can be all over the place, which I think is why we're talking to you a bit today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's, because my background, I provide public speaking and communication success coaching for individuals, teams, and organizations, primarily for events and other high stakes speaking opportunities. I always like to say, I help everyone with every speech, presentation, and conversation at an event that happens. I've been in the event industry for over 30 years, and I started as a creative director, writer, producer of these high-end events, multi-days, big sales meetings, customer conferences. I then had my own business and made it through .com bust, made it through 9/11, but 2008 started me on a new journey, which was really focusing on helping people develop and deliver their speeches, presentations, conversations. So I've been really fortunate to work in many different industries with the top organizations at that point, and in a variety of different scenarios and different locations. And I've also been a TEDx Palo Alto coach since 2017. I've coached over 30 TEDx talks, which is great.
Wow. It's funny because every time I think of great speakers, I do think of TEDx or TED Talks because I know there's a lot of pressure right there. I think I even worked for a CEO one time who got to do a TEDx talk, and it was like, you have to have it memorized. And there's just such a lot of weight there, maybe more so than the keynote to a big audience. You share about that you have experience with producing events. So you knew from the start, you're like, maybe there's a better way to do this, which is really pertinent.
I find I end up being the conduit between the production team and the speaker himself or herself. So if they have a need for the production, I can put it into kind of production talk and they understand that better, and vice versa. It's like, don't stand there, you'll get hit by a car, kind of instructions from the team.
Yeah, find your mark on the stage. And we're going to segue into some get to know you questions. So first of all, Cliff, what are your go-to on-the-ground event day shoes? And I'm assuming from event, this is like you having to walk many miles in your own shoes. But what are your go-to shoes?
It's kind of sad. They died. After the third rehealing, things started falling off. I mean, they were like the best shoes. I probably walked 10,000 miles in those things. So now in the new ones. I need that kind of structure and support, but then you want something soft. But the ones that are a little too bouncy these days, I'm having some trouble. So basically, I'm open to suggestions if anyone wants to suggest certain shoes.
We just did a teaser for this new season of the podcast, season 5 that we're in. I might have to put a little montage together so people will be like, great, just listen to that and I can get some recommendations, because we do have some guests who have made some really solid recommendations. So I'm going to do that, I think, for you. All right, next question. Is there anything that you're listening to, watching, or reading these days that you cannot put down?
Not really, unfortunately. I mean, I'm kind of, for some reason, a little scattered and I need to get my streaming game is off. Started a lot of things and not living up to expectations, but probably the one thing I love music. I'm a very amateur musician, a drummer. And so I listen to all types of music, throughout the day. So it's always my day, constant companion. And yeah, I picked an over ambitious novel as well, which I'm trying to get through, which,
Yeah, I've been there too.
your podcast will be the next thing.
I think that's great, and like I said, I mean, you don't have to skip to the end on all of them, but at the very end, we do ask people about their shoes, at least for the
Mhm.
shoe recommendations, but excellent. Yeah, obviously, there's a ton of awesome experts like yourself that have been on our podcast, so I highly encourage it. Is there a particular social post or a piece of media or even a hot take about events that you found interesting lately?
There's this Farnham Street Sunday brain food newsletter that comes out. And I see that it seems to be a lot, but typically, if not every week, every other week, I take something from that and put that into my message hopper. And so that seems helpful. And then I try to get as diverse sources of news.
Mhm.
I try to avoid getting news from social media. Like Abraham Lincoln once said, "Don't believe everything you read on the internet." I'm a message collector. That's what I try to get people to do as well. Yeah, I'll sign up for a newsletter and do a few of those and then cancel and try some
Yeah.
different things.
Nice. I wanna ask you, maybe let's get a status quo for the events industry from your perspective and expertise. What would you say the state of today's speakers are at events? Like, how are we doing?
I'd say it's mixed. On one hand, there's more and more opportunities, more and more people looking for authenticity. They want to hear from the people who are actually doing it. So there's more opportunity to get people in. But like I said, the audiences is not okay anymore. It has to be, if not better than good, but as great as possible. And just the whole idea with the virtual meetings and hybrid meetings that are going on now, it's just that raises the degree of difficulty as well. And then this age of AI and everything's going on. I mean, this idea of authenticity and then this proof of humanity is really important. On that, the events are getting more technical, the LED screens, all the lighting, all these kind of things, but it's all about creating this one-to-one personal connection with an audience. And then even more so, I think it's the role that speakers play in ROI. And where does an event really deliver that return on investment? It comes from the stage, both the big stage with the keynotes, but I think even more importantly, digging into the breakout meetings, the follow up, the trade show conversations. That's where the rubber hits the road. And I should tell my clients not to use cliches like that. But this is where the real value is made and the connections and engagement and between an organization and its key audiences.
Mhm.
And so my saying is you can't have a successful event without successful speakers.
Every single event planner listening knows the speakers are a huge part of it. I just went to an event, I think it was last week already, geez, where the keynote was Ryan Reynolds. Very lucky, was excited and stuff like that. But it's interesting because a celebrity doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a good public speaker. And if Ryan Reynolds is listening to this, he was great. But also, he was not by himself. He kind of did a back and forth. But then I think about C levels. So I think about C suite people where, okay, probably they're getting welcomed and invited onto keynote stages to be panelists, to be on podcasts like this one. And just because you are either a celebrity, you're a C for celebrity, or you're a C suite person, that does not make you automatically a good speaker. What would you say to that?
I definitely agree with that. I mean, too many times people are just kind of, I mean, obviously in the C-suite, you're busy. And
Mhm.
how do you take the time and find the time to prepare? And so this kind of digs into where I come from in terms of sharing processes and things like that to really help people prepare and deliver the value that deserves. And
Yeah.
again, that's for me, it's all about when you learn about my approach to things, it all starts with purpose. And purpose is the value you deliver to your audience.
Let's speak about that though too, because I have a feeling, and this it gets really human about we just talked about people who are privileged or lucky enough or have a status where like they are welcomed to speak on a stage. And there may be a lot of them that kind of get that deer in the headlights feeling like, oh, okay, I know I need to do this. This is part of what I need to do. And but like we just pointed out, doesn't mean that they've had training, that they're coached, they're just instantly a great speaker because they happen to occupy a C-suite or a corner office or are a celebrity. I would love to ask you, from your perspective and experience, again, over 30 years of coaching people in the craft of spoken word, what do you find to be the greatest challenges for professionals who are finding themselves tasked to speak to audiences, yet they lack the adequate skills to be mic'd up on a stage?
It's, my little saying, I have lots of little sayings as a good speech coach, but everyone wants to be a better, more successful speaker. Most people need help.
Mhm.
And for me, my mantra is change your perspective, change your expectations, change your results. And this whole idea of switching your perspective from it's about me, what I'm going to say, to this whole idea of how do I create that more value for my audience. So at the end of at the end of my talk, they go, wow, that's the best 20 minutes or 30 minutes I've had all week versus why did I just spend my time doing this? It's kind of the question. Then you shift that perspective, and then you can create, go from instead of not an informational talk, but a transformational talk where people are actually changing their beliefs and feelings and all those good things. And then by expecting more, you may not always get everything, but you are going to get more than if you didn't expect more in the first place. That's that whole idea of results. And for me, it all comes down to process. And it's actually the formula to accomplish anything is purpose, your why and what you're going to do. But then it's plus skills. How do in speaker coaching, it's like, how do you walk and talk and all these different kind of things. But then the third most critical thing is your process. How do you get it done? And for me, I call mine, it's good branding, my communication success framework. And it's a 5-step process that I realized, that I started using when I, as a creative director and writer, I had to wake up every day and deliver quality, creative, and great ideas and great strategy. And so I realized I had this process that I've been doing. And when I became a coach, I kind of drew on that. And so the process is pretty simple. It's one is purpose, the first step, and that idea of creating value. And you're going to hear me say that over and over again. And then 2 is strategy. And this whole idea of how do you engage, empower, and energize your audience? How do you really bring their perspective and make it about them and more successful? And then the third step is preparation. First, your content. And I have a 10-step content development process as well. And step 10 is open PowerPoint. And so you come up creating your content, and then the next part of preparation is your rehearsal. And so from there, I have like the 7 focus areas for rehearsal and this kind of rehearsal ladder that you go through. So I mean, it's a whole process, and meaning you can kind of through a process means consistency as well. But then it gives you that kind of freedom within the framework, so you can continually be getting better, but more as you go on. And like for the C-suite people, they kind of internalize this process, and they don't have to go step by step, but they know what they need to adjust and go from there. And then the biggest part of the process is measuring your success. And so I have 4 measures, which is engagement. You're not engaging, you're not communicating. The second one is clarity. Everyone understands what you're saying. And
Mhm.
then the third is alignment, because we want to get things done and you need to get people going in the same direction. And then guess what the final measure of success is? Purpose and
Yeah.
value.
I wanna touch on a couple things you said there, which jumped right out at me. I liked that you said informational versus transformational. Do you find that maybe people who are not adept speakers or are looking at their next speaking engagement think, "I just need to get the information out there. That's the biggest thing I need to make sure the audience gets this information." But they could be shooting farther, a more loftier goal of transforming their audience, transforming that 20, 30, 45 minutes from what it could have been into something new for them. That'd be
There's
great.
a Maya Angelou quote. I may not remember what you said, but I'll remember how I felt when you said it. Humans we're emotional creatures primarily. Belief drives behavior. What we believe is how we act. But the key thing to remember is that emotion drives our beliefs. We typically believe things based on how we feel about them. But being good humans, we're able to post-rationalize. So we come up with this kind of logic or reason to explain why we did something based on our emotions.
Mhm.
And the solid, so you think of your audience that you need to connect with them. Aristotle had their 3 rhetorical appeals, right? It's logos, which is logic and reason, which we think is everything. But the other one is ethos, which is your credibility as a speaker. And then the big one, pathos, which is your emotion.
Yeah.
And you need to appeal to at least all 3. You typically, and sometimes pathos is much more, I mean, just listen to our political discourse these days, and it's all pathos.
That's right. I even think about, like, a speaker where they're like, "Okay, I'm speaking at 1:20 PM in the afternoon. Let me think about where my audience is gonna be. They just had lunch, they're tired from a long day. This is maybe the 6th thing they've come to see today, but I know I've gotta get this across." But I like that instead of making it so transactional, you're trying to inspire, like you're saying, "But I want you to come away thinking that was the best session I was at. I feel different." And almost saying, I bet they're coming into that talk with expectations like, "Oh my god, I hope I can stay awake and let me multitask," but instead, you can change the trajectory of their afternoon based on your talk.
Exactly. Another saying, every time a speaker stands before an audience, great things are possible.
Mm.
And if you get going back to this idea, a group of people that are aligned, going in the same direction, you can accomplish amazing things.
We'll be right back with more event experience after the break. Let's face it, venting won't fix outdated, overpriced event management software that lacks the support and features you need. But Bizzabo's event experience operating system will. Say goodbye to your frustrating legacy event software and hello to building more events that matter. Visit Bizzabo.com, that's Bizzabo.com, to learn more about the Event Experience OS, Click Smart Badge, and more. We're back with Cliff Kennedy to dig into when PowerPoint enters the speaker prep process. One other thing you said was like, wait, what? You talked about a 10-step process of preparation, and step 10 was opening PowerPoint. How early are people opening PowerPoint? Is like, oh, I'm preparing for my talk.
Most people, they start shuffling the decks and they kind of move things around, and then they end up with a bunch of visuals that they're going to try to message. So that's messaging your visuals. And my process is you end up visualizing your messages. So it all, begins with digging into your audience and, the foundation of things and the value you're going to create, what your audience wants, what they don't want, understanding them, creating you're gathering your messages together, and then organizing them and prioritizing them. So that you want to be, what people tend to do is they, evidence there for a conclusion. But what happens when you do that with your audience, you go evidence, they come to a conclusion themselves and they stop listening to you. And so what you really want to do is deliver your conclusion and then back it up with your secondary messages. And that way your slides are working for you and you're not working for your slides. And especially with all this inflation going on, slides don't pay well at all. So
that's excellent. We talked a little bit. I mean, I've noticed a thread we're talking through here, which is very true, is value, the value you are delivering to audiences, and then the value you feel as a speaker. Let's get back to event profs who are listening to this. And the whole thing, I mean, speakers are an aspect of the event. They are trying to deliver an event that brings value in many aspects, the money kind and also the experience kind. And we've all heard that practice makes perfect. But I want to ask you this. This might be a question that event profs even are thinking all the time too, might be a pain point. Can today's event profs really afford to let speakers learn as they go when so much is on the line for event success? Like they're like, I'm going to enlist the speaker. I hope they're good. Like, can they afford to be doing that?
part of the event prof struggle with this is they typically, if you ask me and any other speech coach who their biggest competitor is, it's no one. And that the event, we're kind of off the radar, and hopefully this is why I'm here, because it's on the radar. And it is, so in some ways they can't afford not to, but in a lot of ways, it's not really part of their process as well. So I have clients that work in an event with, with just minimal stuff. Sometimes they'll just go, hey, Cliff, can you do a webinar with one on content development and one on delivery? And yes, and it's all great. Or the other ones are, no, I need you to work 20 hours with the CTO so he can walk and talk and deliver a great keynote. Yeah. And that's the super intense. And then on-site rehearsals, pre-site rehearsals, all this kind of thing that you can get into. So it's always, a step process. The first thing really does, it goes back to that idea of changing your perspective and that realizing you do have control over this by really helping your speakers perform at their very best.
Yeah. You're talking about every speaker can do better, even just that with a little bit of minimal support. Do you have like a particular formula or approach that you take with speakers as far as like, is it cookie cutter or do you kind of customize it?
I have, well, it's a customizable, but I have a process I call Better Speakers, Better Events process. And it's a 16-week process. So you kind of start like 4 months in advance. And this is where you start, your strategy and understanding your theme and everything like that. And then you typically have a kickoff with all the speakers and their communication teams and their support. And then you begin the content development process. And whether it is working virtually in group calls, one-to-one calls, all those kind of things. So it's all kind of based on what's needed and by whom. Yeah. And then we kind of have another touch base with all the speakers for the delivery side of things, pre-site. Yeah. And then they all rehearse, and I have the 7 focus areas and a lot of little rehearsal tricks like rehearsing backwards or rehearsing out of order and doing all different types of things and having some fun. Yeah. And then there's, if necessary, there's pre-site rehearsals. You're doing a first rehearsal with anyone on the stage with hundreds of production personnel everywhere and just kind of, and then see pre-site and then on-site, kind of the offline room where they can work, whether it's scripting, graphics, and then the on-site rehearsal, on stage, the final dress.
Nice.
And then the nice thing is you go back and you go, okay, what's the evaluation? How do we get better?
Nice. You said 16 weeks. And at first I'm like, wow. But then I'm like, that just highlights how important this is. This is not something that someone typically, it's not like, oh, I'm just going to learn to ride a bike in an afternoon, which
Right.
is possible, but this is not that. It carries so much weight with it, which we're going to talk about in the next question, my next question for you. But it's obviously something that takes a lot of training. It takes building that muscle to get good at this. And 16 weeks actually sounds really realistic when you consider what's on the line, right?
It's well to have people thinking about it already. I mean, so for me, again, I tell them fill up your message hopper. This is
Mhm.
the time. Now is the time to go. Okay, I want this data. I'm going to want this. Oh, I'm going to get some stories I can tell about this, or I'm going to read this. I just read this really interesting article. I want to bring that in. And so this is kind of the early beginnings to start thinking about things because we can all come up with good ideas in the moment, but what really good ideas start happening after they percolate and they sit a while in your hopper and they start to mix together and all those ideas. And then when the time comes, what are my primary messages? If I look at all these things, what are the kind of 5 declarative statements I can make from these that become basically the foundation of my talk and my
Yeah.
speech?
Yeah. So
But I'm just on the other hand, though, I've done this in 16 hours as well.
wow.
One of my claim to fames or something. I got a call on a Friday afternoon saying, "What are you doing this weekend?" It's like, "You want to fly into Vegas tomorrow and help us?" He's got to give a speech to 5,000 people, global sales force on Monday, and he's got nothing. And so that's the
Wow.
other hand of thing. That's the live event, my live event experience. That's where that comes into play.
Wow. And I wanna coming back to the question of value, and before we get in a couple other questions too, but just let's hover on this too. We talked about, can event pros afford to let, okay, speaker, you're just gonna cut your teeth on my event. I hope you're good enough for my audience. Let's do talk about money. Like, what kind of ROI are we talking about when it comes to having a speaker who knows their stuff and is executing well versus someone who's just getting up there and kind of winging it? You can tell the skill, the prep wasn't there. What does that mean? Dollars to donuts. What are we talking about results here?
So from an ROI standpoint, it's tremendous. And, it's hard to quantify the ROI, but there are some basic things. Just a speaker that's prepared is not changing the graphics at the last minute. You're not running into overtime with the graphics team, the production team. Your on-site schedule doesn't get blown up because they're doing their very first rehearsal on stage. There's kind of the logistical part of it. As an old-time producer, it's like, okay, how do you make this thing work more smoothly, more
Mhm.
effectively? Just from a general cost standpoint, I did some numbers. It's kind of true. It's like, if you only do a 90-foot LED wall versus a 100-foot LED wall, you can afford speaker coaching. Um, and obviously, depending on what's going on. But the other story, it's like, it could be like 1 to 5% of your budget.
Mhm.
I mean, when you get into multi-million-dollar budgets, it's not anywhere near that, but it's definitely affordable. And it's kind of similar to a coffee service in a lot of ways from a cost standpoint,
Yeah.
but the results are visible to everyone that can see.
Mhm.
And everyone knows, and they go, someone gave me something of value.
Yeah.
And I cherish that. And I really appreciate that. And I'm going to remember that next time I'm going to buy something or all those very good things.
I'm just even thinking while you're saying that, like I think about a platform like Bizzabo where we do webinars and we power events, as particularly virtual ones too, but also in person. But you can track, especially for virtual, but also for hybrid and in person. But you can track the moment that someone is checking out. Like if they're like, yeah, you had me for maybe the first 2 minutes, but if it's not an impactful speaker and they're not giving me any value, guess what? My eyes are going to skate to another screen. I'm going to start looking at my phone or multitask, and you lost me, and that is lost ROI.
I mean, I do the air pressure test. You're standing in the room that you can actually feel because people start they're breathing in and breathing out at the same time, and the people are holding their breath while the speaker pauses. And you can kind of sense that in the room, these ballrooms with not super high ceilings and stuff. But you can feel that there's the energy in the room is there. Again,
Yeah.
like live events, I love them. So
I'm gonna be listening for that next time, and I'll be like, "Okay, everybody good? Is their pressure changing?" That's how I know.
my call to action for all event profs is SCATE, spelled SCAITE, and pronounced SCATE, and it stands for speaker coaching always in the estimate. So that again, some clients may not want it, but it's like how hard is it to throw it in the optional things, the pitch, and when some clients who go, they don't think about it until you mention that to them, and then you go, wow, we can for $10,000, we can get a speaker coach and make the event better? And the answer is yes. And they go, that's good, let's try it. Or our CEO needs help. Or more importantly, we have a lot of technical and a lot of technical people that are giving talks. And how can we make them more effective too?
I love
So
that.
skate.
I love it. No, and it's super important to learn because again, from a planning standpoint, that's important for our audience to know, be like, hey, this not only is this an option, maybe it's a must do because
Mhm.
especially if you want that to be a successful event for everyone, from attendee to sponsors to the C-suite to your board to the sales team and everybody. Super important. Thank you for sharing that. And then I know that looking at what you do, you also specialize in working with non-native English speakers as well as more technical experts. And that's such an important part too. Shoot, this podcast is from a SaaS product. There are developers and engineers behind the scenes who are making this happen. They're great at what they do, maybe not exceptional or skilled at speaking to a very large audience. So, and that's just the technical side. And then, of course, non native English speakers because there are speakers across the globe that offer value.
Right.
They aren't in just one geo. So I'd
Yep.
love if you could share a bit about that experience and why it's so crucial that you also work to help these groups get better at speaking.
Definitely. So let's begin with English as a second language. Like you said, we want to bring new voices, more voices into these events. That's everything we want to do. And for me, I'm married to an English as a second language person. So I'm through that. But my whole belief is that those people have superpowers, that they're
Mhm.
able to think in different languages. And because the language you use has some impact on the thoughts that you have. And they're able to see things differently and say things in a more unique manner because they have these different perspectives. So it's like, that's anyone says people don't want to hear me because I have an accent or something. It's like, no, this is the superpower that they have. But when it comes to accent, there's ways to work on that. I'm not a pathologist. I don't deal with those kind of things, but I say read English, newspaper articles out loud, and it'll help with that. And if there's certain sounds that you have trouble with, we focus on that and help them avoid that or overcome that. And then for the technical people, so often they're the ones who really buy into this whole perspective and changing things around and this understanding. It's going from evidence conclusion to conclusion, and here's the evidence to back it up.
Yeah.
And this is where we get to this idea of AMD, or absolute minimum detail, that you need for your audience. And so really helping technical people shift their perspective so much more, instead of going, this is not about me and all this kind of cool tech stuff I'm loving, to this is about my audience, who for this particular audience, they're not super tech people. So I need to be, give them the detail that they need.
Yeah.
But my next one is with all these other tech geek nerd people that we can just totally get tech out on it and go crazy with it. It's just really,
Right.
again, it starts with that shift in perspective.
Yeah. I love that, and really important too, and that's where I think, especially our listeners, it might be easy to default to somebody like, "Oh, that might be the easy get for a speaker," but remember, if we're trying to provide value to that audience, broaden the scope of where you're looking, and like you said,
Exactly.
tap into those non-native English speakers, the global speakers, tap into the technical as well, because talk about bringing some knowledge, and they really can, and might just need a little help, like you said, to make sure they're bringing that across. I finally have our last and easiest question of all. Where can our listeners find and follow you online, Cliff?
I have my website, kennedyspeech.com. There's famous Kennedy speeches, and then there's me. Let me look that up. And I'm also on LinkedIn at Cliff Kennedy. If you have any questions, anything like that, or you'd like to learn more about my processes, please just reach out. I'd be glad to help.
How about buy one, get four free? Cliff's Skill Up Advice has 5 parts that are important to today's event planners.
I've been playing around with micro learning courses, and I'm just putting the finishing touches on one for event planners and producers. And so it's 5 strategies that they can do. Notice that they're not tips or tricks, because I'm a consultant. I do strategies, which you charge more for. But so these 5 strategies are: 1, make it a priority. So this idea of thinking about helping your speakers succeed, make that a priority. Have a process, which, whether it's my process or your process, however it works, but that's how you get things done. The third, I say, is walk a mile. Try to think about your audience's or your speaker's perspective. And so often they're missing deadlines, all these kind of things. There's usually some reasons beyond that they don't want. I mean, a lot of people have a fear of public speaking, and how do we help them understand that and go through that? And then measure results with engagement, clarity, alignment, value, or everything. And then the fifth strategy is get help. And whether it's, obviously, I'd love to help everyone, or there's some tremendous coaches everywhere. So don't be afraid to get help. We're here to help.
Thanks again to Cliff Kennedy for joining us on Event Experience. And thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the show, we'd love to hear it. Connect with us on social and subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you're listening. Also, don't forget to share the show with your colleagues and friends. You can find transcripts of each episode and key takeaways on bizzabo.com/podcast. On behalf of the team, thank you. We'll gather again soon for a new episode of Event Experience.